Hello, and welcome to another episode of College Students Striving for Justice, a podcast created by 7 Arrupe Scholars at John Carroll University. My name is Drew Kleinmann, and I am a senior at John Carroll. I have been an Arrupe Scholar all 4 years of my college experience. Our program has revolved around studying social justice issues and working towards advocacy for an issue in which we are passionate about. This episode is going to be about my social justice focus on the school-to-prison pipeline and juvenile justice. Through my leadership roles with the Carroll Ballers and Power Source programs, I have seen firsthand how these issues affect people. The school-to-prison pipeline is an issue deeply rooted in the issues surrounding our perspective and support for urban and at-risk youth. The pipeline explores the significant, disproportionate rate of youth in disadvantaged communities that end up in youth incarceration from school. The ACLU describes this issue by saying, "Children should be educated, not incarcerated." We are working to challenge numerous policies and practices within public school systems and the juvenile justice system that contribute to the school-to-prison pipeline. Some of these mentioned policies include zero-tolerance rules in schools, increased police presence in schools, and a huge disparity in funding between inner-city and suburban public education. In this episode, I will be featuring 2 awesome interviews from Zach Thomas, who is the founder of the Writers in Residence program, and Jacqueline Brackett, who serves as the volunteer coordinator at the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Detention Center. They will talk about their experiences while working with youth at juvenile facilities and how we can all support the residents they work with. In addition, we will get into a little bit about what volunteer and mentorship programs have worked and why. I hope you enjoy, and now you will hear from Zach Thomas. All right, everybody, welcome back to College Students Striving for Justice. This is the episode, again, on the school-to-prison pipeline by me, Drew Kleinmann. Here is going to be my first interview. I'm interviewing Zach Thomas, who is a Carroll grad. Zach is the founder of the Writers in Residence program here at John Carroll and is currently pursuing a master's in nonprofit administration at John Carroll as well. Zach's a good friend of mine. I really thank him for doing this interview. How's it going, Zach?
It's going well, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I think first, people listening to the podcast might want to just hear a little bit about what Writers in Residence is and how that came about, how you founded it, basically what it does and what's the goal of it.
Okay. Yeah, so it started in 2016, 2017. It was me and some of my closest friends that, we were looking at the Carroll Ballers program that was here that we talked about earlier. And we wanted to really see if we could replace basketball. That's something I'm not good at personally. But we were studying creative writing, and we wanted to see if we could replace the basketball aspect with a creative writing workshop,
right?
With the residents, and that's something we piloted a few times at the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Detention Center. Great reception. Even the Carroll Ballers at the time were like, the conversation that they were having were a lot deeper. Mm-hmm. The engagement was higher, so we knew we had something that we kept pursuing, and then we piloted it at Cuyahoga Hills Juvenile Correctional Facility.
Right, okay.
And that was pretty nerve-wracking. I think that was like my second, but first experience going to a prison, which is different than the county jail.
Very different.
I mean, you are like going through several locked doors, giving up a lot of your,
security checks.
Yeah. So then, you were in a room with a lot of residents, and you're just like, I don't know, you forget your whole game plan, that was kind of like, a huge lesson I learned.
Right.
You have this whole idea of like, okay, we're going to do this, and then you're like, oh, shoot, like, what are we doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're looking at you for all the answers, and they're like, why are you even here? And so, anyway, we got started. But our main mission right now, because we became incorporated in 2020.
Okay.
So we, teach creative writing to youth who are incarcerated to empower their voices and assist in their reentry into society.
Great.
We have 8 cohorts, and I'll probably use this term a lot, but a cohort is like a partnership that we have between a college university and a juvenile facility in the local region. So okay. John Carroll is our first one. That's our current one still. Oberlin College, Hiram College, Heidelberg University, College of Worcester, Marietta College, and University of Dayton and Capital University are those.
Great.
And so other facilities in the nearby area.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I think from the perspective of a college student, the easiest way I feel like to do service sometimes is to build relationships in something that's common. Like in terms of like creative writing, everybody's written poetry in school, but it's still a challenging thing for anybody.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that what I really like about Writers in Residence and what you talk about is just the way that like both the youth in the facility and the student and whoever's participating are both challenged by this. No one's the better, and it's the same way with basketball. The Carroll Ballers, like,
right.
No one's in the NBA, no one's playing college. Like, everybody's just trying to have fun with it. There's no judgment. There's no, I'm better than you. Everybody's just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good thing about Writers in Residence. And another question I had was, so when you go to different facilities, you mentioned you have cohorts in Oberlin and John Carroll at different areas, and you go to different centers. Are there differences you see? You mentioned going to your first prison was a little different. Yeah. Could you touch on a little bit about the differences you see between facilities like the JDC downtown versus like a youth facility at ODYS or something like that? Okay. Like any differences you see in that?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's important that I like to share is just, population is a little bit more transient. So, at a county facility, and that a county facility would be Cuyahoga County, like the jail, the juvenile jail, even though they call it something completely different, right?
Yeah.
They're there as like a holding. They're there to see the judge and to see what their consequences are going to be. So they could be there, supposed to be for a few weeks, but sometimes it could be 6 to 8 months, right? And they're just like in this limbo space. So we might see them 1 week, and then like next week they're gone or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that makes it really hard for us to develop the relationships and engage with them. On the flip side, when we go to a DYS facility, and that's Cuyahoga Hills, Indian River, Circleville, or any other alternative placements, they are there for a longer period of time. So we know when we work with them on a certain unit that they're going to be there for a year, 2 years, whatever. Which is unfortunate because they're there for they're just there
right
for such a long time. But it's kind of good because that gives us a bigger window. Like, okay, we got them for 6 to 8 months, or however long we're going to be with our workshops, and we can make an impact there every single week.
You can set goals, set up a plan.
Exactly right. And then I think that's when I think we see the most improvement in like their self-esteem, their confidence, and their writing too. Because from that week 1 workshop, and they get in there, they're like, what the heck is this? I don't even like writing. I don't even like reading. Compared to like week 7, week 8, and they're like looking forward to like they want to give us ideas now of like what they want to learn about writing. They're like, what, can we learn about this sort of type of poetry? I kind of heard about this. Like, and I'm like, okay, yeah, for sure. Next week we'll do a workshop just on this. And I think that's the trust and respect that we develop. I mean, that's what you want to achieve. You want your population to tell you what they want to learn and how they want to be engaged, right? But we sort of slowly open that up. But I just general context too. So our program model works with college students, like we mentioned, but it's 12 weeks long, weekly, for an hour now because it's remote and COVID, but it used to be like 90 minutes inside the facilities during the fall and spring semesters.
Great. I think what I really like what you touched on there is that, like in the first question, we touched on the importance of building relationships, but I think when you go upon that, it's the long-lasting relationships which makes more impact.
For sure.
Because sometimes it's hard to trust somebody and to really engage when you're just meeting them for the first time, obviously.
Oh, for sure.
In any situation, not even, especially in a youth facility when you have a college student going in. So I think if you're able to like get those inside jokes, hey, remember last week when you wrote that awesome poem or when you hit that cool shot, it's like it's like normalizing the relationship instead of having it just like we're here to do a service.
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of what I tell or prepare my student volunteers about is like, we're not necessarily going to be fixing anything. Like, we're not doing anything that needs to be repaired or anything like that. We're just showing up. And I think that is really the service that we are specializing in, like just showing up, being present, to listen, to understand, to empathize is really big.
Right.
I think that's some of what I think is a motivating factor for me is like when college students who have a lot of privilege work with our residents, and they're like, wow, like not like there's a lot of similarities in our life, but like what they thought about this population is completely different. They see a more human side of like, whoa, we like watch the same cartoons, like we went to a similar high school maybe. There's a lot of common denominators that we end up uncovering that makes us see them for who they are, right? Instead of like the way that a lot of our society wants us to see them. And that happens on our student volunteer side, but I think for the staff too, that's like my favorite moment is when a staff person is just chilling in the corner, they're supervising whatever, and then someone writes a poem or reads something or says something or is demonstrating behavior that is contrary to whatever stereotype that they have already inhabited. They're like, whoa, I've never seen this kid quiet in my entire life.
Yeah.
And I've been here for like 20 years, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think those are the moments when I'm like, okay, whatever we're doing is working. Or whatever we're doing is, of course, changing the perception of how the staff who work there 24/7, 7 days a week with the youth, right?
Right.
So those moments just stand out to me the most, and why do we just try to achieve? Because those are the people we need to be impacting too. Even though residents are our primary focus, everyone has a stake in this.
Right. I think those moments are really special. Like a story, like you said, like I was doing Carol Ballers, like pre-COVID with Danny DeMillo, and we were having a good session, and there were a couple guards that would just hang out there while we would play basketball.
Right.
But one of them got in, took a couple shots, and like it's a very different relationship when you bridge that gap between like staff member and resident, because they know the residents better than anybody else.
Right, exactly, right?
Yeah.
They know their personal record.
Yeah.
They know how long they're going to be there. They know what triggers them, who they don't get along with, which is crucial. So if they're calling down people and they're like, oh, you can't, no. Like, they don't get along. I'm not dealing with that. You know what I mean? Yeah, they know everything.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part is that they know that they always say, like, it's the way it's working is what you said, is when you can bridge those barriers, like those stereotypes.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Carol Baller sometimes would be like, oh, you can't have house 6 play with house 5.
Right.
Like, they don't get along. But sometimes, like, we would get those 2 residents, those 3 that don't get along, we'd put them on the same team.
Yeah. Squash.
Clicks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
there's no problems.
And that's when you think, like, this is really getting somewhere. I agree. Yeah.
One that really reminds me of Father Greg Boyle. He talks about that, his effort to just facilitate conversations between different gangs in California or whatever. I don't want to say like we're doing that same work, but part of that is being reflected. Like, how can we bridge people who have these differences, and then for them to be like, you know what, I respect this space, I respect this program, whatever beef I have, I'm not going to bring it to this environment.
Right.
And I think that's incredibly special, that Ballers executed and that we have executed too on several moments, because part of our workshops, like, I always try to elicit difference. We learn a lot from people who think differently than what we think about what our lived experiences are. And we don't have a lot of that, right? We're kind of losing this aspect of, how can I learn from your lived experience even though it's different than mine? Yeah. And so considering that there's value in what you've gone through and there's value in what I've gone through, and sort of piecing it all together is really important. Yeah. So when they might like bicker and yell at each other and make fun of whatever, but they're not gonna. It's not aggressive. No. It's just like teasing or whatever. We've never really had an incident where it's gotten out of hand, which is really unfortunate. Yeah. Which is fortunate. Yeah.
So a little bit of background about my research paper, because during the Arrupe program we go through 4 years. Yeah. You're supposed to, first year you find out what you're passionate about. You go through some different options you have. Sophomore year you kind of start doing some research, and then beginning of junior year you really put that together in like a research paper. Nice. So some of my research was based on like the causes of the school to prison pipeline and why there is such a disadvantage, like the disadvantaged youth, like the black community like is so much higher. The rate of their incarceration in these facilities is, we've seen it in person, like it's visibly higher. And I was just looking at the causes, and some of the causes I found out were two I kind of wanted to touch on. Was one, the zero tolerance policy in public education sometimes. And it was just so interesting in the fact that a lot of times we always emphasize give people a second chance. They're young people make mistakes. But when you look at how some of these disadvantaged youth are treated in these inner city public schools or in disadvantaged public education, it's kind of like, there's exceptions obviously, but it's kind of like the zero tolerance policy is like, you mess up, good, we'll give you to the youth facility in the detention center to help you figure it out. And I just think that policy sometimes is giving the impression that you mess up once, you're done. People, we mess up every day. And I just want to get your thoughts on that and what you thought about. It obviously varies, but some of my research was showing that, and it was just very interesting to me.
This is one of many policies
right.
that definitely contributes to the school and prison pipeline, right? But this is a policy that fails to recognize, in my personal opinion, right? Fails to recognize that in youth who are still developing as individuals have no room for error. And that makes no sense to me. If we can reflect our own middle school years, high school years, we've all messed up. Right? For someone to not have room for error doesn't mean they have room for growth. And I just think that's, at that point, where's the hope? Because you're in a situation where like any wrong step, then like my life could be completely ruined. So then you're just still, you're stuck. You're like, I don't even know what to do, and I feel incapable of doing anything. So honestly, what's the point? I'm gonna just do this anyway because it's gonna happen eventually. You know, that's kind of how the mindset gets in there. But I think it definitely needs to be reimagined of how we discipline youth. And I'm not using that like in an aggressive way. I'm saying how can we approach youth who, and this is always cracks me up too, is like a lot of the teachers know their students have certain needs that need to be addressed, but they don't address them. They just disregard them, punish them, and push them to the side, right? Then I think the zero tolerance policy is a symptom of that too. It's just like, you know what, we're not going to tolerate anything. If you act up one time, we're just going to get rid of you. That's no way to treat a youth. That's no way to educate someone. Because in order for them to be successful, it's like, okay, what's really happening? What do you need to be successful in this space? Your success is not going to be happening in incarceration. Like that's just, it's not going to happen. I mean, that's just like, you've gotten to the end of the line now. You're just like, you know what? Because then I think at that point, all these things that people have told you compounds. People have told you you're a bad student, you're a bad person, you're not good enough, blah, blah. And then you're like, well, you know what? People keep telling me these things. I'll be this thing that they keep calling me. You know, and then we're sitting here like, well, why does this happen? Well, because the people who could have prevented it weren't doing it in the first place.
I think what you touched on at the end right there about kind of the lack of confidence we instill in some of these youth with some of these policies. And a lot of my paper was written about, well, the beginning was kind of about like, what does the American dream really tell? What does it really mean for youth? Like, and it's a big question, but it was just kind of a good hook into my paper, and the fact that like coming from a white privileged suburban school, you're in kindergarten, you're in first grade, you're making posters about what your dream is, what you want to be when you grow up. You can do anything. And that, at some level, tries to continue through middle school, high school. They try to get you to college. But when I would talk to some youth, like I would ask them, like what's your goal? Like, what do you want to do? Sometimes some of them weren't even never asked that question sometimes. And the fact that really pissed me off, honestly, and that is what drove me to kind of research this, because when youth are supposed to be pursuing their dreams, and dream's a big word, even just something they're interested in.
For sure.
As little as that.
Could be graduating high school.
Yeah. It could be interested in, like, oh, I want to, like, get good at working on cars. Like, I want to do something like a hobby or something like that. Like, that's supposed to be, like, facilitated in education and, like, pushed through. But a lot of these kids, when they mess up once, they're like, oh, your dream can't happen because you... So that was what a lot of my paper was about. And I just think it's really cool how you guys emphasize that, like, the perspective of instilling, like, growth.
I mean, that is, in my personal opinion, that's youth development.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about school, when we think about things are rehabilitative, that's what we should be focusing on. I mean, that's what the business I'm in. I mean, in youth development, how can I get you to be? How can I ask you that question too? Of like, what's your goals? What are your dreams?
Mm-hmm.
And we actually, I'll tell you this quick story. So we borrowed an activity from Transit Arts, which is an organization based out of Columbus, and it's called Creative Dreams, or CD activity, right? And youth from Columbus designed it. It's a bunch of questions because they were curious about the older community in their neighborhood, about, you know, what were their goals and dreams when they were growing up? Did they actually accomplish it when they got older? So the first question is, like, think of something that you used to do when you were younger that made you forget about the time. And you're like, oh man, I used to play hide and go seek around my, like, neighborhood or whatever. I used to, like, ride my bike, you know. And then you're like, well, what do you do now that, you know, makes you forget about the time or whatever? And you're like, they could be completely different. And so we have another series of questions, and there's another question that's my favorite. It's like, some of them are, like, I don't want to say practical, because a lot of dreams and goals are practical, but it goes, you know, if you had everything taken care of, all the money in the world, what job would you do that you think would make the world a better place? And they answer one way on that question. And the next one goes, you know, what's your dream job, whatever. And they could be completely different things. Right. And, you know, at the end, I asked them, like, how do you feel about this activity? And they're like, I've never been asked this question. I never really sat down and had to reflect on, or, you know, what I used to do then, what I do now, what I want to do. And it's just a constructive activity that I think is really helpful, just to put ideas on paper and to be like, whoa, like, okay, these are the steps I need to take if I want to, you know, become a marine biologist, which is something someone said once. An astrophysicist we heard one time. We had a few FBI agents, which I thought was sick.
That is cool. Nice.
And it's just like all these, and I'm always asking too follow-up questions, like, what sparked this interest? You know, sometimes some are like, you know, I read a book once, it was like a detective story, and I thought that was really cool. Or like, I went to the zoo one time, and I was like, I want to be working at the zoo like this person is there. And so basically what we're getting at is, like, sort of resources, like, who has access to resources that instills these opportunities. Yeah. So
I really like that activity. That's cool.
Yeah.
And then lastly, like, before we wrap up here, I just think a little point about our podcast through this Arrupe program is kind of just our target market is college students listening to this, and the fact that some of them, me included, coming into college or in college, have never heard of some of these issues, and we're trying to shed light and awareness on these issues, but also we're trying to shed advocacy and action, which is the more important part of those two ends. And I just wanted to ask, like, how can students get involved in Writers in Residence? What do you think students can do? We're gonna wait for this little truck to drive by. Like, what can students do to, like, get involved and kind of keep this conversation going?
Yeah, so for our program particularly, you know, you can sign up on our website. That's one of the ways. Like, if you want to volunteer and you're an undergraduate right now, you want to wait? I don't know what they're doing.
That's okay. We can keep going.
Okay.
You can probably hear
you can sign up to volunteer. You know, we have applications come out all the time. Oh, they're coming back this way.
We can get a little moment for the little truck here.
Are they going slow? Oh, they're stopping.
Oh, man.
Oh, dang, what a bummer. Here, we could just pause it.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah, so if students want to get involved, they can always visit our website, writersinresidence.org. Sign up to volunteer that way. You know, I think just sharing that we have our chat books is really important too, because it's one way that student volunteers can learn about actual stories that our residents write, and sharing those stories with people in their community is really important. So that's another form of advocacy. If folks want to sign up to be mentors, this is something we're trying to create a network with too. So we have a lot of residents that come out on the outside. We want to pair them with peer mentors around the same age, that we could just keep tabs on them, keep them on the same path, that we've gotten them back on track when we've had them inside. We wouldn't say no to money. Money is always really nice.
Money's important.
I think it's just having the conversations too, and I think this is something that we can always do. Just educating ourselves about the juvenile justice system, criminal justice system, and just in certain spaces when something comes up, just addressing it. When we're talking about a population that is misunderstood, just be like, hey, I know about this cool program. This is the work they do, and this is what I've learned about what they're doing. Maybe taking some time to read what the residents are actually saying instead of what the media is portraying to be.
Great. Thanks, Zach. Well, podcast will be coming out here soon, so I'll let you know when it comes out so we can all listen. Again, this is Zach Thomas, the founder of Writers in Residence. Let me know, Drew Kleinmann, if you want me to get you in touch with Zach.
Yeah, please.
And we thank you for having you on the podcast.
Thanks so much. A pleasure.
Okay, everybody. Well, welcome back to College Students Striving for Justice, a podcast of 7 Arrupe Scholars at John Carroll University. This is our senior advocacy project, and we're doing a little podcast series, and this is my episode on the school to prison pipeline and juvenile justice. I have here my second interviewee, Jacqueline Brackett. Jacqueline is the volunteer coordinator at the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Detention Center. Jacqueline's been working for them for a long time and doing great work in the community around Cleveland. She's Cleveland born, and she does great work, and I'm interviewing Jacqueline to let our listeners know a little bit about what the JDC is and what things work and what things don't. Hi, Jacqueline. Thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Great to be here. Great to be a part of this podcast.
Thank you. I guess my first question is for our listeners is what the JDC provides to youth and what your role is at the JDC, and just a little background on what the center is like.
Well, I'm the volunteer coordinator at the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Detention Center, and the mission statement is to provide for the care, welfare, safety, and security of all juveniles under the supervision of the detention center's services continuum with the support of community partnerships. So I provide a platform for these community partnerships to come in to provide programming that are going to help our residents to take responsibilities for the choices that they have made, and also to become productive citizens once they're released.
Nice. And I guess my next question would be, so as your time with being the volunteer coordinator at JDC, what kind of mentorship or volunteer programs have you liked, or what are some of your favorites, and why do you see them helping the youth more than others?
Well, I think the most positive relationships we have when we have groups of people who come in who engage our youth, they're respectful to the youth, they connect with the youth. And a prime example is the Carroll Ballers, which was created through the John Carroll University, and students there was a couple of students who actually came in with another group. They were with the Boys and Girls Club, and it was a program called Passport to Manhood. And this program was focused on character education. Well, there were a few of the students who participated as volunteers, and they shared with me at the end of the semester that they did not see the youth being as engaged as they should have been. They were afraid to talk in the small groups. So the students said the John Carroll students said they wanted to provide a program that would encourage them to talk, and they felt, comfortable doing so. They wanted to provide a basketball program. So they continued with the character education. It was 1 hour of small group discussion and then 1 hour of basketball. So it helped the youth and the students to bond with each other. They felt comfortable with each other, and it was successful.
Great. That's good to hear. I think that when I touched in my research paper that I did for this project, I talked a lot about like my Carroll Ballers experience and how building relationships with the youth I think was the most important part. Not so much like what we were saying, or it's just building relationships and making sure that the week to week relationships we would build would continue to grow. And I really like that about the program. And another question I had was for the listeners, that give some background on my project. I'm studying the school to prison pipeline and kind of how youth in inner city public schools sometimes are subject to some disadvantages versus funding in suburban schools on like inequality in that kind of sense. Could you explain a little bit about the process of like the program a youth would go through, like from day one through when they're at the JDC, and what kind of that growth looks like when they're in the center?
Well, our youth here, and they're called residents, they're not called inmates, they're called residents. They are provided education through the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. We do have a school in our facility. It is called Downtown Education Center. The initial process, they're admitted to our facility and they're assigned to a living unit according to their age, not according to why they were detained. And so until they have their court hearing, they are provided the services that they need to continue with their education. We have a medical department here. They have the shelter, the food, the clothing. So the only thing that is not normal is the fact that they cannot leave out and return to their homes until they are they await what is going to happen through their court hearing. So the volunteers come in, and in the meantime, they're providing like character education. We have yoga, we have art projects, we have motivational speakers, and we just have people who are just trying to let them, and we have religious services. We have chaplains and religious services volunteers as well. So basically, we're just trying to offer them opportunities to learn about resources that are available to them, character development, social skills, life skills, and just to improve their chances of successful reentry.
Great. Thank you so much for that. It's awesome that you guys do so much for the youth in the center. And I think it's really great that they continue their education. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much the JDC and centers like the JDC do for the youth in their programs. You mentioned reentry at the end of your answer there. Do you know of any, or are there any programs that when a resident would leave the JDC, are there any programs in Cleveland or that you provide that help them with reentry?
Well, basically, the volunteers that I work with, community partners, they're also in the community already, like Golden Ciphers Incorporated.
Right.
And so these people are coming in already, and they let the residents know what's available for them once they return to the community. We have International Men of Excellence also dealing with character education and teaching them how to tie a tie, to respect themselves, what healthy, what healthy relationships look like. We have a Mom's First program for our females, and this is available in the community. And one day they came in and they had a session on House 5, and there was a young lady who was expecting, and she did not participate in the group. But once the group session was over and asked her while she was, she was listening, what does she think about the group? And she revealed to me that she was actually a mother to be and that she needed help. And so while the group was still on the house, I did notify the social worker and I notified the service providers that this young lady would need help. So they were going to make arrangements for her to receive care once she was, while she was still there and once she returned to the community.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. That's awesome. I guess one last question I have is, so for college students or students in the Cleveland area, or honestly students anywhere who are looking to do some advocacy work or action work to support the youth at the Juvenile Detention Center or other residents and other centers around the country, what are some things that you think college students or listeners can do to support the youth from outside the center?
I think first of all, to realize what I like about my what I am able to do is to change perceptions. People have perceptions of those who are incarcerated, and there's a lot of, if you hear some of the stories, you really don't want to know what brought them here in the first place. You don't want to know, or you don't think about what they were going through to end up in the position that they're in. And some of them have had some really traumatic experiences in their life. And that we're just not too different at all. I've had the residents say, when the students were working with us, they were talking to us and, they encouraged me to go to college. And I noticed that they like art just like me. So they know and recognize their similarities more so than differences. And that the volunteers who come in, they show that they care and the youth feel valued. And even these activities that they participate in, they experience a supportive environment and discover a skill or a gift that they didn't realize that they had.
Right. I think that's really awesome. I think that is one takeaway I had when I did the Power Source program at the Juvenile Detention Center, my first and second years at Carroll, and then obviously going through the Carroll Bowers program. I think what people can realize either from listening to this podcast or doing service at the JDC is that we're a lot more similar than we are different. And I think supporting that kind of perspective and supporting the youth as equals and how we're similar. And I think that's really important. And I really like how you're trying to spread that perspective as well through your role at the JDC.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that has been Jacqueline Brackett. She's the volunteer coordinator at the Juvenile Detention Center in downtown Cleveland. And Jacqueline, thanks so much for being willing to do this interview and doing this podcast. And can't wait to bring Carroll Bowers back to the JDC and some great programs once the pandemic kind of filters out here.
We can't wait for you to be back, and I appreciate you having me on this podcast, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.